All right, guys. What I would like to attempt is for me to, we're going to work chapter by chapter. So we're going to skip a couple chapters, but basically what I do is I work through the chapters, pulled out kind of the key verses that will aid the building of the story like we wanted to do. So I'll just kind of jump to key verses throughout, give some commentary, and then once we finish up a chapter, I want to hear any input that you guys have. So I might have to cut you off or not have as many questions just because we are getting pressed for time. But cool. So let's jump into chapter 4. So we know the story up to chapter 3, right? Because we had the what we call the fall of man, but we had the rebellion of Adam and Eve in the garden, and they're removed from the garden, and now they're out in the wilderness, and the curse is on creation. But that's where we pick up the story. So Genesis chapter 4, we won't read all of it, but kind of the big thing in it is Cain and Abel and their relationship, which is, it has some tension there, some tension between the two brothers. But Adam and Eve have the children, and they are out in the field one day, or I guess it starts out by they are offering sacrifices to the Lord, right? And so right off is kind of interesting because they knew to do that even back then, before the Torah was written, before the sacrificial system of Moses and Israel. So that was kind of a thing already. How they knew that, I don't know. There's smarter people than me that can, share how all that fits together. But they're sacrificing. But what happens? What happens with Cain to start with? What does he bring to the Lord?
An offering of fruit of the ground.
Yeah. So he's a farmer, brings the fruit of the ground. Now later on, there are sacrifices where you bring your crops and stuff to the Lord. But apparently in this situation, that was not the type of sacrifice that the Lord was wanting. Some say it might have had to do with the heart of Cain, but I don't know. I kind of lean towards it's not the proper sacrifice. But what does Abel do?
He's a shepherd.
He's a shepherd, seems like, right? Yeah. Or yeah, actually I think it says he's a shepherd. And he brings what seemed to be a proper sacrifice. So let's jump into verse 4 of chapter 4. Interesting, right? Sin is actually embodied here in a metaphorical sense. And I think there's some implications that we can draw out from it. I should have pulled in what James says about sin and how it forms as a desire in the heart. But simply, the process of sin begins with a desire that rises up in the heart. It begins there. Now, James actually says that we're tempted when we're led astray by our own desires. So I would encourage you, I forget exactly where it's at in James, but go find that passage in James and just kind of meditate on that in light of this story. It may not, maybe not meant to go together exactly, but I feel like some implications could come out there. So a desire forms in the heart, but this sin desire it desired to take Cain over. It's so weird. But God instructed Cain to be master over it. So guys, I just want to say, don't let sin get a root in you. Don't let it even get a root. But before it does, master it before it has a chance to arise. So that's, very practical implication. But these are the first humans that we see walking in the way of sin. So I think it's appropriate to pull that out. But if we're continuing the story, we have a problem here because now both brothers are disqualified to be the seed of the woman, right? So Adam and Eve have children, and Cain and Abel are disqualified because Abel's dead and Cain is unrighteous. He can't be the seed. So this leaves us with a conundrum. What's going to happen? Well, we see in verse 25 down in the chapter, Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. I pulled this out of the ASV, but it's because it actually has the word here. But for she said, God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, for Cain slew him. It's interesting, right? He's appointed me another seed. So they have this expectation working in them of God is bringing about his promise. He's going to do what he said. So Seth becomes the carrier of the seed promise. Is Seth the seed? Maybe he's the guy. Maybe he's the one. And the story of the Bible almost unfolds this way. It's like you have a really awesome guy, awesome character. He's doing it. And then, man, this one stumbles. He can't be the one. And so on and so forth. As you get down, just another significant verse, I want to pull out Genesis 4, actually two more, but Genesis 4:19. We have the first instance of multiple wives, and it's from a descendant of Cain. It's Lamech. So 4:19, Lamech took to himself two wives. The name of the first was Ada, and the name of the second was Zillah. And I think we're supposed to see this as, like, this wasn't how God made it good in the beginning. I think that's part of the implication that's supposed to stand out. The whole multiple wives thing is just, it becomes allowed, but it's not ideal. Not ideal, obviously, right? Last thing I'll pull out and then open up the floor. Genesis 4:26, very significant verse, I think. It's at the very bottom. It says, at that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, this will pick up later, but I think what's happening here, and again, we'll see it in a bit, is people are now evoking God's name, calling out to him for restoration, that he would do what he promised. So we're moving along in history, and it's like, when is this thing happening? And they're calling out to the Lord. So, some interesting stuff as we move forward. We'll surround that topic. But we'll pause. Give me some input. We got 2 or 3 minutes. And then we have to move forward.
One thing that I'm kind of like a little confused on is like the multiple wives, because like if it's a descendant of Cain, like, it makes it like not a good thing. But David, who had a heart of God and who was like very loved by God, had multiple wives.
Yeah. So this is
So
why
was he sinning?
I said it as like God makes it a, what is the word? Prohibition? Not prohibition, that's the opposite. He gives like allowance for these type things, but it is not the ideal thing. So like that's why the garden reality is a good term, because there's things about the garden reality that are not a part of our reality right now and their reality. So God had allowed these things and not actually made them sin, or said these are sinful, like slavery. Slavery is an allowance that is actually in the Torah, and that's like, whoa, that's a problem. But the ideal reality is God setting free the slave, setting free those who are captured. So those are realities, a lot of which actually the New Testament is pushing us away from. And like, not, Torah isn't overturned by the New Testament, but some realities are like, let's take the right step back to this garden reality, because this is not okay. So that's one of those things. It's like God is allowing, but it's not ideal. And I think we're supposed to see that in Lamech, who's just not a good dude. But one more. Anybody else? Cool. Let's jump to the next chapter. So chapter 5 is genealogies. And just so you know, genealogies, they're boring, right? But as you start to learn things about the people maybe in the genealogy, they become way less boring. And one of the primary things about genealogies is that they are displays of God's faithfulness to the humans to continue giving offspring and allowing them to be fruitful and multiply, and ultimately to bring the seed. So there's a few key figures through here, but just know, like, genealogies are displays of God's faithfulness to humanity. That's what we're supposed to see when we read this. Several other things, of course, but just kind of think, okay, I am reading the story of God's faithfulness when I go through these things. But 1 or 2 key verses, 5, 2, and 3. Genesis 5, 2, and 3. Did y'all notice anything standing out there? He had a son in his own likeness according to his image. So just as Adam and Eve were image bearers, so now the offspring are the image of their parents. I think different people would say there's different implications for this, but I think one, potentially, and I have in the notes, but just as the humans were God's image, so the humans' offspring were their image, possibly implying that the same sinful tendencies were present. There's a lot I could say about that, but I don't have time. But they're following in the image and pattern of their parents, and maybe it's just not as big a thing as I'm making it. It could just mean they look like their parents. I don't know, but there's probably some stuff there. But just to say, I'm not a Bible scholar, so I'm a low-level Bible teacher doing my best here. So these are type things that you can look out and search for on your own. So, yeah. All right, so Genesis 5:18 and 24 is another one. I'll just read that one. Just another person in the genealogies as we're going through. So-and-so get so-and-so get so-and-so. Jared, or Jared, I don't know how to pronounce that, lived 162 years and became the father of Enoch. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And it seems that the understanding of the biblical authors and their understanding, it seems, I'm trying to think of a few key passages, but Enoch most likely ascended into the paradise of God, what later Paul called the third heavens. So he was taken up and actually walked with God. So next one, Genesis 5:29, just kind of cruising through these. It came, he called, okay, so here is the father of Noah is naming Noah. This is cool, so watch how this works. Now he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed." Noah's going to give us what?
Rest.
Yeah, and deliverance from the toil. Where did toil come in at? When did toil start?
Sin?
Do what?
At the garden.
And the curse. So the naming of the children becomes this expression of expectation, right? Maybe my child will be the one. And so he actually names him Noah, which means rest. It's not the word rest like shalom, Shabbat, but it's a different kind of rest. But they're naming him saying maybe he's the one that's going to bring about the end of the toil and the end of the curse, right? So really cool things happening there, I think. And so the question becomes, will this be the one to remove the curse and give rest? But we will find out later that even Noah fails to reach the qualifications. So, cool. I'm all stop. Comments, questions, chapter 5. We're moving pretty decently, so I think we have time to maybe have a few extra comments if we have them.
Going back to the verses about the genealogy of Jared and Enoch, what was you might have said already, I might have missed it. What was the difference between Enoch's relationship? How did he say he walked with God and no one else did that? Why was he the first?
There's a book that is written, it's just before Jesus lived. It's called the Book of Enoch, and we're actually going to read a passage out of that in a minute. But it has a lot about Enoch that is not necessarily true, but the relationship with Enoch might be fleshed out there, but I don't know right offhand. Just basically, I think the common answer is that he was just a very righteous man in his generation type thing, and just had a relationship with Yahweh, and they walked together. And you can almost see references to back to the garden there, where maybe they're walking together in the garden, if that's where God came down to. But I don't know. That's a good question.
And you said that he was the one that went up to the third heavens?
It seems like later, either biblical authors or extra biblical authors, people outside the Bible, think of him as actually being taken up to the presence of God. The book of Enoch that I talked about, he goes to all the different levels of heaven and like sees the watchers and like sees fallen angels and all kinds of stuff, which we're actually going to read some of, which is going to be fun. But yeah, that's the scholarly stuff that I just not as good at. But yeah.
You said that Enoch ascended to the third heavens. How come we don't hear about the different kinds of heavens, like very much in the New Testament? It's just summed up to heavens.
Yeah, so in the Old Testament, it's heavens, plural. Again, these other Jewish writings just before Jesus' time, they talked about there being 10 heavens, but Paul in 2 Corinthians, I messed it up last time, 2 Corinthians 13, actually, I think it is, talks about he was taken up to the third heavens, Paul was, or most likely it was Paul. So we do have an instance of multiple heavens there, but again, all that means is just like, this is where the birds are, and up a little bit higher is where something else is. But God seems to be, in Paul's mind, in the third heavens. So it is in the New Testament. It's just like, some of these concepts, they just have so ingrained in their mind that when they're writing the New Testament, they don't have to like write it out in detail like, guys, there's 3 heavens, or however many. They can talk about it, and everybody that receives their letter knows what they're talking about, you know. But again, I don't want to get too like dogmatic about the multiple heavens, like there's 3 of them. I mean, that's not really the point. It's just kind of ways to distinguish that there's different things in different parts of the heavens, and they're almost like given dominion over these different places. But yeah, anyway, long answer for a simple question, sorry. Did that answer your question though?
Yeah, that was
Okay, sorry. Anybody else on this chapter? We can do one more.
You said like about like the Book of Enoch. Do they get like all their information from like old biblical texts, like that were lost over time, or are they just making all of it up?
So I think, again, this is above me, but what it is like, so someone writes in the name of Jesus, in the name of Enoch. There's other ones, and it's just a basic practice where it would kind of like give your book more validity, but everybody knew Enoch didn't write it. It's someone who might know oral tradition, or maybe there's some writings that they had during that time. But like if you read the Book of Enoch, there's things in it that are just not true. I mean, just frankly. But some things might be more valid than others. So it might be oral tradition. It's kind of, I think, what the author of the Book of Enoch would probably say that it was. But I don't know that too well. That's just above my studies, unfortunately. But the Book of Enoch does get quoted by Jude in the New Testament, and I think quoted or referred to by Peter.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a history book. Like we can quote from a history book, but it's not sacred text
Yeah.
for us. Yeah, so cool. All right, and unless there's anything pressing, we need to move to the next. All right, chapter 6. So I think we've done enough groundwork that we don't have to maybe take too long on this. But this is the rebellion in the heavens. And again, we've talked about this enough. I just want to maybe pull out a few key things that perhaps we haven't chatted about just yet. I don't even know if we should read the passage. Did everybody read these chapters for this week? Do y'all want to read this section? Okay. I don't know what to do because I want to save time. Let's just jump down. Sorry, just getting my thoughts. So basically, we've talked about plenty of times, the sons of God are in the heavens, they come down. These are divine beings who are procreating with the daughters of men. We've talked about that enough. But notice in verse 6, something that God actually says in response to this. Actually, verse 5. Then the Lord saw, after the men of renown, the Nephilim, were on the earth, then verse 5, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. The Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animal to creeping things and the birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I made them. So in my notes here, you can see as we move forward in the biblical narrative, it is inaccurate. Oh, I already said that. So we've talked about this before, but it's all this is saying is there's more going on to the problem of earth than just Genesis 3. We talked about that. But what's actually starting here, and actually started in Genesis 3, really started in Genesis 1, but you see a different storyline beginning to form throughout the scriptures. And this storyline is about the divine beings, and it actually interweaves at key points with the storyline of the human beings. But we'll see, or we see in this chapter, you have the two rebellions of the humans and the divine. And so the situation is created that we need a both human and divine person to come and fix it. And as the story weaves together, that's kind of what we see. And that leads up to who? The human divine one. Who is that? Jesus. So the whole story is painting this picture and interweaving where we have this need for one who is Jesus to come, a God-man that can reign in both the heavens and the earth, is what we get pointed forward to. Next part is just in Job 38, 4-7. It actually says that these divine beings, I want to flesh out who they are just a little bit. These divine beings are actually present when God is creating things. So they're present at creation. Now they're created beings themselves. I mean, only Yahweh is uncreated. But they're actually there singing. It says the sons of God were singing when God did his work of creation. So these beings, whoever they are, the sons of God, they are present when God actually creates everything, the heavens and the earth. Don't ask any questions on that because I don't know how all that works, but it just seems to be what Job is saying. And we know the result is the Nephilim. So one of the things that a lot of people point out is that the Nephilim, the giants on the earth, and the intermingling of the sons of God with the human race, what it actually has done in some people's mind, is it is actually messing up the bloodline from Adam and Eve, moving forward to the seed of promise. So there's what's the word that I actually use? A corruption in the bloodline of humanity. And so this is one of the problems, because you got to have a seed of the woman that is human and that is pristine and righteous. But now you have an intermingling of unrighteous divine beings with the human race. And what if that perpetuated itself on? Now I don't know if that's an accurate thing to see in this text, but I've heard that, and I think it's compelling in some ways. But the above description of the scenario of Genesis 6 is attested to later by other Jewish works. Let's jump down. Turn your Bibles to the book of Enoch. That was a joke. It's a joke I use when I go there. It's in the notes. This is one of those, it's called the pseudepigraphic writings, but it's basically somebody using a pseudonym or a false name, writing in the name of someone else, which was not like, it doesn't have the stigma that it would today. It was just a common thing back then to do. So this is the book of Enoch, and I think it's pretty neat just to read this, because it gives the Jewish perspective on what was happening in Genesis 6, at least somewhat of a Jewish perspective. Somebody want to read? We won't read the whole thing. Actually, maybe we should read the whole thing. Somebody want to read Enoch 12, 1 through 6? I think this is first Enoch. Did I see your hand? Yeah, go for it.
Before these things Enoch was hidden, and no one of the children of men knew where he was hidden, and where he
Abode.
abode, and what had become of him.
So just pause right here. This is just basically kind of giving comment on Enoch was taken up, or where to go, type thing. So go ahead, verse 2.
And his activities had to do with the watchers, and his days were with the holy ones.
So the watchers would be a name for like these divine beings. I won't say more on that, but the watchers and then the holy ones would be the divine beings. Sorry, I keep cutting you off, but keep going. Verse 3.
And I, Enoch, was blessing the Lord of majesty and the King of the ages. And lo, the watchers called me Enoch the scribe, and said to me, Enoch, thou scribe full of righteousness, go, declare to the watchers of the heaven who have left the high heaven, the holy eternal place, and have defiled themselves with women, and have done as the children of earth do, and have taken unto themselves wives. Ye have wrought great destruction on the earth, and ye shall have no peace nor forgiveness of sin. And inasmuch as they delight themselves in their children, the sons of God come among the daughters of men, is most likely the impetus that lead to the blood.
Good. The last part was actually my note, but yeah. So this is really cool, I think. Maybe it's just me as a nerd, because these are writings between what we call the Old and New Testament, but in the Second Temple period, between the last prophet and the coming of Jesus. They're writing a lot during that time, and some of the things that they're writing about include Genesis 6 and speculation on what's going on there. And so there's a lot of different theories about Genesis 6, but right here we can see, well, what did maybe an ancient first century Jew think about this occurrence? And you have the watchers coming down and marrying the daughters of men. Crazy stuff. I'm nerding out, but the sons of God coming among the daughters of men is most likely the impetus or what led to the flood. I think, there's unrighteousness, but there's also, now we have the intermingling of the divine in where they have left their proper dwelling place and they've come down and mingled with the human and their dwelling place. And so this is a problem in God's eyes, and this is part of what leads to the flood. So I'll pause there. Any questions about the divine beings and this whole scenario? Now's the time, guys. This is a good one.
I just have a question where Enoch is at. Like, where is it at? The book.
You can find it online.
So it's like a separate book?
Yeah, so we have the, I guess the evangelical, our canon called? Anyway, we have what we would normally call the canon of the Bible. There's another portion of text called the Apocrypha. You guys have heard the Apocrypha? Maybe? It's just text that, I forget, I guess it was part of after the Reformation or something. I should know that.
Isn't that the type of Bible that the Catholics have where it's
Yeah.
added books into it?
Yeah, well, more of we removed stuff.
Okay.
Removed some things that, I don't know all the history behind that actually, so let me not say that. But so the Eastern Orthodox Church would have the Apocrypha and the text that we have. How I think we should relate to it is we really do need to know what the Apocrypha says, because not holding it necessarily hand in hand with what we call Scripture, but there's a lot happening in the Apocrypha that actually informs some of the Scripture text. So maybe not to the level of Scripture, of course, but the Apocrypha has very, I think, important things in it. But then you get to, and maybe it should be in the Bible. I don't know. There's, it's in a lot of Christians' Bibles. The Apocrypha is. But then Enoch is a different grouping of texts called the pseudepigraphic, which is just another name for like writing with someone else's name. And so there's a body of text as well. And all of these things are forming together to inform kind of what was the mindset of the ancient world? How were they looking at things during that time when the New Testament was being written and stuff like that? And that's really important because we want to get inside the mind of Paul and the mind of Jesus and the mind of the apostles so that when we read their writings, we're like, oh, I'm not just importing my context into what they're writing. I'm understanding their context better. And so these things, as you get into higher level studies, you're going to be studying like the books of Enoch and the Apocrypha and stuff. The New Revised Standard Version has a translation of the Apocrypha in it. Is a good one if you want to read some of them. So, yeah. But that's where it would be. I think you can just find it online. But the Book of Enoch wouldn't be in the New Revised Standard Version because it's not apocryphal, but it's online. So, any other questions?
Yeah, I got one more.
Yep.
Is there any, like, actual detail of what, like, or, like, what the divine beings, like, what it look like? And,
There is in the Book of Enoch, and they're like 70 meters tall or
Aren't they
something
like really
stupid.
scary looking?
Yeah, I don't know the exact details, but I don't think that we should think that. Oh wait, the divine beings. I don't know if there's descriptions of the seraphim and the cherubim and stuff, and they're like these mashed up animal creature things, half human craziness. I don't know how that would relate to the other divine beings. Yeah, I would just maybe lean on the descriptions of the seraphim and cherubim that would be in like, are they described in Revelation? Yeah, I think so. But described in, I can't remember if Isaiah 6 describes them. But like one has the head of a bear, another head of a lion, stuff like that. So just really weird stuff. But
Explains why they always say, "Do not be afraid."
yeah, right, right, yeah. But, well, those might be the angels, and they might just be scary because they glow or something. But now, the Nephilim, the giants, the Book of Enoch does say they're, like, crazy tall, but I don't think that we should. That's one of those things. It's like the Book of Enoch is probably off on that one. But, yeah. Any other questions?
I have a kind of crazy one.
Okay.
So you know how we're made in the image of God, right?
Yeah.
So angels aren't made in the image of God, but they're always portrayed as men. So wouldn't they not be men like us? Women like us? Wouldn't they look different?
So I'm going to send out a video after the course that actually is, if we had time, we would watch it during our time. But it's a Bible Project video, and they do a really good job of like the different distinctions of what is actually making up the divine realm and stuff. And so you have those who are in the role of angels, because angel is a job title, it just means messenger. But whenever you see someone acting as a messenger, an angel, they're always like human. They look like people. But then you have descriptions of like the cherubim and seraphim, and they're like mashed up animal creature things. And then there's Satan and stuff, and the sons of God. And so there's a whole cast of characters on our playing field. I think that video might actually answer your question a little bit. It'll at least show that there's different categories. It might not answer the question too much, but as far as who's in the image of who, I don't know. I know humans are in the image of God, so yeah. Yeah, there's more I could say on that one, but yeah, I'll have to stop there because anybody else on this chapter? Cool. Let's skip all the way to 11. So I have 9 in here, but we are almost out of time. So we have the situation of the flood, that's chapter 7 and 8. Did anybody actually have any questions or comments for chapter 7, 8, 9?
I might have, but I don't have my notes, so I
Oh, no.
forgot.
Okay,
I have one about 9.
okay.
When it says, it's Genesis 9:20, it says Noah became a man of the soil. It's kind of like what Cain was. He was a worker of the ground.
Yeah.
You see Noah do the same thing.
Okay, so that's actually good. I'm glad you pointed to that because I would have forgot something that is important there. So we asked the question, could Noah be the seed? But we find out that Noah, when he comes off the ark, is, let me just maybe sum up the notes real quick. Noah, when he comes off the ark, he and his family, they're given a blessing that's actually very similar to the blessing of Adam and Eve. Be fruitful, multiply, stuff like that. But then, it doesn't have subdue the earth, though, which is interesting. I don't know if there's anything to that. After the ark, you see animosity between the animal realm and the humans, but also it's not until after the ark that you're allowed to eat meat. So that was not until the ark, after the ark. And then, let's see if I'm forgetting anything. Yeah, so then you have Noah. He seems to fail the test to be the seed because you find him, he creates a vineyard, makes wine, and gets drunk and naked. So he's drunk and naked, and what happens is one of his sons, Ham, comes in, and it says let me actually just read it. So what? Yeah.
Snitch.
Snitches get curses.
Right, don't snitch, guys. Where is it? Okay, so it's verse 22 of chapter 9. But Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brothers outside. And then Noah wakes up and curses Ham's son Canaan. And you're like, well, what's going on there? Let me just read Leviticus 20 to you real quick. Leviticus 20:11. If there is a man who lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood guilt is upon them. Leviticus 18:7-8 says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, that is, the nakedness of your mother. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. So the question, there's a lot of different commentaries on what did Ham actually do to his father. And if you just read the narrative, it's hard to catch what might be going on. But what actually might be happening here is Ham actually went in, and as like an ancient way of trying to usurp the authority of his father, he actually laid with his mother or his stepmother or however that worked. And so maybe the offspring of that is Canaan, and that's why Noah then curses Canaan, the son of Ham. That's a potential. Okay. Did I go too quick?
I just never thought of that.
Yeah, so it says Ham sees the nakedness of his father, and then Noah. Then Noah wakes up, curses Ham's, or at some point curses Ham's son Canaan. Leviticus says that if there's a man who lies with his father's wife, so you lie with your father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. So could it be that, I know ancients say stuff weird. Could it be that Ham actually had relations with his father's wife or his mother or however?
Was his son?
And Canaan was the offspring of that.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's so weird. So in the ancient world, this would be a way of taking the authority from your father in a lot of ways. Weird, I know. There's other answers to what's going on here, but this one seems, I heard it recently and I think it's probably the most.
That makes the most sense.
It makes
I
no
don't
sense.
want
And
to
then
make
Leviticus.
How could you be that mad at someone, at your
Yeah.
son for seeing you naked when he probably saw you naked on the ark when you literally lived there for 40 days?
Yeah, right, right. So,
I get it.
I do have a question, I just remembered, Haley, and
Okay.
I was reading,
Your brain.
and Anna was like, make sure you ask him this question, because I'm not gonna be here. So in chapter 4, when you go back to verse 1, we got to with verse 1. She conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. You know, that sounds, to us, it was kind of funny, because it was like, well, Adam wasn't enough of a man, so here I have one now. You know,
Yeah.
and I thought it was funny that you chose a different translation to specifically get the word seed out of that verse.
yeah. I thought that was about,
Was
is it
that
Shem?
another verse?
it was about,
Oh, okay, that was about the other one.
yeah, that was about, oh my gosh, it's Shem, right? Or is he later? No,
Seth.
that's Seth. Yeah, Shem is Noah. Yeah, Seth, I have gotten another seed, because Cain killed Abel. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, why she says I've gotten a man, I think just, I don't know, could be like, I've gotten someone who could be the seed, I don't know. Yeah, there's probably something to it, but is there a better question, or is that the question, or?
That was the question, we were just wondering why she used that phrase, that I have gotten a man.
I don't know, look up a commentary, maybe, it might.
You're our commentator.
I don't have an answer on that
These
one.
are commentary.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have an answer on that one, sorry. Yeah.
You better speed read because you got like 2 minutes.
I know, I got 2 minutes. Well, y'all are just gonna have to be maybe a little bit late, because this one's really important. Tower of Babel, okay, so I've been waiting on this for a while. What is the Tower of Babel? Genesis 11, 1 through 4. I'm just gonna read that and then say a few things. Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. And it came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, whatever, and settled there. They said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used bricks for stone, and they used tar for mortar. They said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, or the heavens. And let us make for ourselves a name, otherwise we'll be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. When was the last time that humanity evoked a name? They were calling out to the name, on the name of the Lord, right? They were calling out to the Lord. Well, now I think we're supposed to see a connection where now they're saying, well, let's just make a name for ourselves. Now, at the end of the last chapter, I forgot to bring it up, Nimrod, who's a mighty hunter before the Lord, he is the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom. He's probably not the best dude at the end of chapter 10. It's in chapter 10. Nimrod, the beginning of his kingdom is Babel. That later becomes Babylon, which is like the enemy of God's people all through the scriptures. But the beginning of that is Babel. And okay, that's all I need to say on that. But several things are at play in the verses that we just read in chapter 11. So let me just read through them. We are seeing the next major rebellion of the humans now on a larger scale. This is the final straw, as we will see. So Adam and Eve rebellion, Genesis 6 rebellion. Adam and Eve was the humans, well, humans and a divine being. Genesis 6, you have a larger group of the divine realm leaving their abode. Now we seem to see where this might actually be a divine and human thing going on. You guys have taken parts of Old Testament now. What is the Tower of Babel most likely? You guys remember talking about that with Matt? Ziggurat. Yeah. What was a ziggurat? Do you know?
It's a tower to reach God. Or
Yeah.
like a man-made.
So guys,
Yeah. So like a temple,
so the guys can come down.
so the gods can come down. Yeah. So a ziggurat was like a man-made mountain. I don't even think they had any tunnels and stuff in them, but there was a platform at the top, and they were a place where they believed that the gods would come down to. So I think most scholars now would say that this was probably a ziggurat. And they are gathered in the land of Shinar, and I think that's probably like modern day Iraq or Iran. Iraq. And they're gathered saying, let's make a name for ourselves, and hey, part of that, making a name for ourselves, is let's have the gods come back down. We need to duplicate Genesis chapter 6 again, is probably what's happening. We need this to happen again. Because remember, this is a 2,000-year time span that we're talking about, from Genesis to Abraham, potentially, or to the tower, 1900 or something like that. So you got a long time span, and you have another rebellion, very similar. So let's just kind of flesh it out just a little bit. We notice a gathering when Yahweh had instructed the humans to scatter, fill the earth, subdue it. This tower was most likely a ziggurat. We already talked about that. It is a human-made mountain. So the desire to have the gods come down could have come out of the previous two rebellions. In the first rebellion, what happened? A divine being came down promising divine knowledge. Eat this fruit, you'll know that you'll have the knowledge of good and evil, just like God. He's promising this to them. In the next rebellion, the divine beings came down and produced offspring among the humans. These were mighty men. The humans could have attempted, so what could have been happening in the second rebellion was them, the human part was them attempting to gain divine or everlasting life by having procreation between the gods and humans. So again, we're getting back to this place of we need eternal life because everybody's dying. Like we read the lifespan and it's like 900 and some years. In the biblical testimony, that's a travesty. They were supposed to live forever. But this guy died, and this person died, and this person died. So what are we going to do? Well, let's give our daughters to the divine beings and see if maybe their children will live forever. So this intermingling is trying to bypass God to bring about this restoration. So in this rebellion, we're at it again. Let's make a name for ourselves. Let's do what God promised ourselves and create this mountain where they can come down to. We can do this again. The humans could have attempted, to gain eternal life. In this next situation, the human race is trying to make a name for themselves, and possibly they're wanting the gods to come down. Yeah, I just said that. But could Nimrod, the guy who started Babel, could Nimrod be attempting to make himself the seed, so to speak? Is he trying to fill that role and make himself the seed of the promise? Rather than calling on the name of the Lord to restore, they are making their own name. And what's interesting is we'll see in the next chapter that Yahweh promises to make Abraham's name great. So they're trying to make a name great for themselves, but Abraham has said, I'm going to give you a great name, Abraham. But now, what happens? God, they build this thing, they say, let's get the gods to come down, but then what happens? The Lord came down. Wrong guy. We don't want the Lord to come down. We wanted the other ones to come down. I love that. I don't know. The Lord came down on top of their ziggurat. And he said, we're going to go down and look at this because this is wicked. And he disperses the languages. Sorry, I'm kind of speeding through this because we were way past out of time. The Lord came down to see, and the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have one language. You know, I don't even need to read that because we know what happens. He disperses the languages. But we talked about this is the beginning of the families of the earth, or the nations of the earth, right? So the nations are formed at this place. But there's one more thing that I've been kind of holding off for us, and I think we need to get this if we're going to grasp the rest of the scriptures and really our life right now and the rest of the world. What happens here, let me just actually read my notes because I'll get it wrong. The situation results in the establishment of nations, Prior to this point, there were no other nations, but simply one unified humanity. Okay, so look here with me. Guys, look in your notes at Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. And it gives us a significant insight into the situation of God creating these nations and dispersing the nations out. Here we go. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, so when he said, nations go out, here's where you're going to be, here's where you're going to be. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, Tower of Babel, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. Who are the sons of God? The divine beings. He fixed the borders of the nations according to the number of the sons of God, the divine beings. And then it says this, verse 9. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted inheritance. And you can also look in Deuteronomy 4 for this as well. But the Lord divided mankind because of their reliance on the other gods and on themselves. This was the last straw. Here the Lord disinherited these nations. The Lord said, I'm done working universally. I'm now going to move into chapter 12 and do something different. But he disinherits them. He says, you have walked away from me to follow these other gods. And he's done. But these are the very gods that had rebelled against the Lord. But now the nations of the earth are under the rule of other gods to be led by them. This makes sense of our current reality and the rest of the scriptures. What God actually does is he says, divine beings that are rebellious, human beings that are rebellious, I'm now pairing you together. And now the nations are ruled by the other Elohim, the other gods, the other sons of God. And they're sent out. Then God says, but I am calling Jacob as my people. The nations are under the rulership of these other divine beings, but I'm going to call Israel, and they're going to be my inheritance. And that's why Yahweh is the God of Israel. He's not the God of another nation. He's the God of Israel. The other nations are ruled by wicked divine beings that we translate the word as God, but gods. Now again, what I'm not talking about is modern plural thinking, whatever. What is that word? Pluralism? Yeah. I'm not talking about that, but like how much of reality makes sense when we recognize that there's wicked beings that are actually in authority over nations. Like, I knew this, and then I went to India, and I was like, holy cow, this is absolutely legit. And we have the concept for it that there's principalities and powers and rulers in the heavens, and rulers over the nations of Greece and stuff, like Daniel talks about. But this is where that begins. The Tower of Babel. They're dispersed, and they're handed over to the divine realm. Does that make sense? Okay. Questions? That's a load right there.
That's just crazy. I never realized that before.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
So are you seeing like the city of Nineveh, like the Jonah went to them, like it was like being ruled over by? Okay.
But even that king, even the king of Nineveh, it says that he tore his clothes and repented.
Mm-hmm.
So is that a divine being repenting?
No, I mean, like, what does it look like for nations to repent? I think just, like, the people still can, walk in righteousness and stuff. But, yeah, I don't know how all that works exactly. But we know that there's divine beings that are ruling in the heavens, and they're not doing a good job. And so if you read Psalm 82, I don't remember if we talked about this, but that God said, yeah, we did. God sits in the divine council. Among the gods, he holds judgment, and he's rebuking them all the way through the chapter because they're not ruling righteously. So, how much allegiance each nation has to a God and how much they have to obey, I don't know how all that works. And certainly nations can turn and walk in righteousness. Like, Yahweh is not the God of America. What is, I don't know. And yet, we, as a people, the majority at times, especially probably maybe more in our founding, we gave a lot of our allegiance to the God of Israel and followed his Torah and followed his law. And there would be other nations that would come and join themselves to the house of Israel. So, it's certainly nations and peoples can turn to righteousness, but there's the divine realm that has sway over the nations. But imagine the day when the divine realm is no longer leading the nations astray. What is that going to look like? Good grief. That's exciting.
I got one quick thing. I was just,
Yeah.
So at the council, at the table, whatever, he's rebuking them, like in the heavens. Why wouldn't he just kick them out? Like, why they go bad? Why not just do it?
Well, one is God has a day set to do that. Sorry, got eye twitch. He has a day set to do that. And that's like some of the things about the day of the Lord. So again, this is why the story of the divine and human history are interweaving, so that there's a day set when God is waiting patiently until he does these final things. And then Jesus will be the human who rules as king over the earth and king over the heavens. And every knee in heaven and on earth will bow to him. And so this is where the two storylines are going to culminate at the day of the Lord. But God has patience and he's waiting until then. Now, in Genesis 6, it does seem like some of those that rebelled are bound in Tartarus, or Tartaro, or however you say that. But clearly there's other divine beings that are being rebellious in the heavens. And God's just, he's allowing it for a time. His family in the heavens. But there's a day set when that is going to be finished.
So
Good question, though.
is the divine council is not in heaven, it's separate from heaven.
I think it would be in a portion of what we call the heavens.
Okay.
But God is at the top of the heavens.
Okay. Because I don't know if it actually says in the Bible, but I've always heard God, he can't be around sin, he can't stand on the side of sin. So I'm confused about is how, the divine beings are sinning against God, yet they're still his, the council.
Yeah, like rebellious children that still live in the house, but we're not kicking them out. Yeah, I don't know.
I guess it's all just part of his plan.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we still need to see there's divine beings that aren't rebellious, right? So, Gabriel and Michael and stuff. But,
Head honchos.
do what?
Head honchos, archangels.
I still didn't hear
The
you.
head honchos are archangels.
Oh, yeah, right. But, sorry.
Well, I was just wondering if the conversation was very good.
Yeah, and we had to go over just a little bit, but yeah. So there's some of the council that might, like Satan or the accuser, the adversary in Job, comes up before the sons of God, and God says, "Where have you been?" He said, "I've been roaming to and fro." And he says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" So Satan, or an adversary, an accuser, has access to this divine realm, or the divine council. Again, I don't know how all those things function, but just trying to kind of piece things together. But one more and we got to get out of here. Jared's looking at me through the window. He did.
Sorry, when you said something about Tartarus, is that mentioned in the Bible? Because I know it's in Greek mythology as well, so I thought that was kind of...
Yeah, it is. It's in Jude.
Oh, wow.
Jude or Peter. I think it's Jude. Yeah, and it is in Greek mythology.
I believe the Bible also mentions Hades, which is also in mythology.
Yeah, yeah. Sure thing. So those would be Greek words that would have similar meanings in both kind of Greek and Hebrew stuff. So Sheol is the Hebrew word, and then Hades is the Greek word for like the holding place of the dead. And then Gehenna is the lake of fire. And that happens at the end. It hasn't happened yet. The lake of fire has not been set up yet. So yeah, and then Tartarus is like the lowest place in Hades.